Hello, good afternoon, just about, and welcome back to Football League World TV. It's time for another debate show here on the channel. I'm your host, George Dagless, and joining me this afternoon is Marcus Ally. Marcus, how are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, George. Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. I think Oxford have been one of the most exciting teams to follow in the EFL in recent years, so it's justice and very well deserved that we're going to dedicate a debate show to them.
Yeah, we're talking all things Oxford United for the next 20 or so minutes. We're assessing can they get into the top two by the end of this season in League One, and if not, where will they finish? Oxford fans, do get in touch with us. We are live, as I said, for the next 20 or so minutes. We're across Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Let's get straight into it. Marcus, I think it probably makes sense to perhaps look at the start of this campaign for Oxford and how they've got to this point, sitting fifth now in the League One table. In recent years gone by, that they've struggled, haven't they? Really, at the start of campaigns, and at times they've almost been worried about, perhaps even being in a relegation battle. Managed to turn it around over the course of the season, and quite often still got themselves into the playoff places. So, looking at where they are at the moment and how the season so far has gone, they've kind of perhaps got over those poor starts in previous years and given themselves a much better footing to try and achieve promotion this year, haven't they?
Absolutely, I think the second half of the season has been consistently a strong period on the whole for Oxford. So now they've given themselves that initial platform this time around that will definitely be confident of kicking on and getting closer maybe to those automatic promotion places come the business end of the season than they have been in recent years. As you mentioned, flirting with relegation the sort of first 10 games of last season, I think that's probably been an underappreciated achievement that they ended up managing to pip a few clubs to sixth place on the final game of the season. They were cast aside by Blackpool in the playoffs, but Blackpool were comfortably the best team in League One at that point in time. So yeah, I think Oxford are very well placed. They've timed their run maybe a little bit better this season. And if they can have a good January transfer window, keep on to some of their best players, then I think they put themselves in a really good position to continue competing with clubs that have much bigger budgets than them in what is a very high profile League One promotion race.
Yeah, I suppose peaking at the right time is always key in a promotion challenge, and you always look back to sort of when Sir Alex Ferguson was in charge of Manchester United. He always said just after Christmas is when it really starts getting going, and that's obviously what Oxford need to do. But do you think that there's an element of, because they're coming from a much better start of the season, they just need to work out when is a good time to really start? Obviously, any time is great to be winning games, but really start hitting their straps. They've got to get the timing right, especially given perhaps some of the teams that we'll get onto around them have got deeper squads. They really need to make sure that they get it right at the right time.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that the squad depth maybe would have been a concern at the moment, with of course a lot of players being unavailable for COVID reasons, and obviously the injuries that you can get from heavy fixture congestion. But I almost think that's a strength for Oxford. That there's so many players in the side that have been there a good few years now. Carl Robinson's in his fourth full season as manager at the club, and just building those relationships week in week out and having a smaller but tighter knit squad that can go again Saturday, Tuesday has definitely stood them in good stead in recent years. And with those players carrying over, despite links away with Oxford's successes in the last few seasons, I do think that puts them in more of a unique position than some of the other clubs around them. We've seen the rebuilds that have gone on at the likes of Wigan, Sunderland to an extent as well this season. So I think maybe that could be something that pays dividends in the second half of the season. And they've got the experience of being in this position before, maybe not at this stage in the campaign, but they definitely know how to negotiate these tricky fixtures that can mean so much in terms of the table. And I think it would be nice for them to be the team that's sort of in and around it already, rather than in that chasing pack as well.
And let's look at their squad now a little bit more in depth. Some of the standout names for this season, obviously Mark Sykes, Matty Taylor, James Henry. In terms of their strengths, Marcus, would you say they're the three that are perhaps the outstanding ones in the squad, or are there other areas where you think the Yellows are particularly strong?
I do, yeah, I do think there's other areas. I think Henry and Taylor is as close to guaranteed goals and assists as you can really get at League One. They've been there and done it before, and are really important senior pros in the squad. As you mentioned, Mark Sykes is having a almost breakout season. He's been around a while, but to have scored 8 goals from midfield areas at this point of the campaign, still just 24 years old, and a player that can cover a lot of bases as a very versatile midfielder, is a huge asset to the squad. So he's kind of pushed his name into that elite bunch of players within the squad where maybe it wasn't in other seasons. I think Steve Sedan has to get a mention. 3 goals and 5 assists in all competitions from left back is sensational, really. I think the fullbacks are very important to the way that Carl Robinson looks to play, and Sedan's been class this season. He showed in glimpses his quality in loan spells away from Birmingham, AFC Wimbledon twice, and Portsmouth in recent years. But to finally get a permanent foot in the door, get settled somewhere at Oxford has really enabled him to kick on this season. I think at 24 years old, he's a player that we will probably see playing in the Championship at some point. That could, of course, be with Oxford United. And then you've got the central midfield duo, Cameron Brannigan and Herbie Kane, I think, are probably 2 players that do have potential, and possibly even their level now they could claim to be playing at a Championship level. For me personally, I think Herbie Kane walks into that Barnsley side the way they've been playing in the last few months. So to be able to rattle off 6 key players as we just have, I think speaks volumes to the group that Robinson's been able to assemble together, and why they're in such a strong position in the table.
I think one of the buzzwords you used there, Marcus, was group. I think it's probably fair to say that although Oxford have got some very good players at this level, they perhaps don't have a marquee name that some of the other clubs do. I mean, you look at someone like Sheffield Wednesday and Barry Bannon, for example. He's obviously one of the key examples you could use in this particular argument. But do you think that actually helps Oxford in the sense that they don't really have that? Obviously, they do have good individual players, but they don't have players that are really like stand out. There's a real collective. There's a good level there, and they all sort of understand each other's roles. And like you mentioned earlier on as well, they've all been together for quite a while now, or a lot of them have, and they seem to understand what each other do and what they need to do to get results.
Yeah, I think not having a standout player and sort of larger egos within the squad can help create that atmosphere that gives the younger players. It is a relatively young squad compared to some of the others in League One, and it can create that atmosphere and give them that platform to express themselves a little bit more than if you feel like there are some larger personalities and maybe players on higher wage packets within the squad. It definitely gives them a different sort of strategy when trying to dig themselves out of trouble, as we've seen them do in recent years. Sometimes the more high profile players in the squad can either carry the team on their shoulders or sort of fall away their performance levels due to being frustrated at how things are going on the pitch. So I do think that helps Oxford, and it is possibly easier to manage for Carl Robinson as well. We've also seen some Premier League clubs trust them with some excellent loan players in recent years, and I think maybe that culture that Robinson's be able to create and a clear identity really at the club and the way that they've looked to recruit has definitely been a real strength that's helped them over quite a long-term period in terms of the size of the club and the financial muscle they have, punch above their weight.
And it's quite handy that you mentioned the size of the club, because let's get onto that as well, because that kind of carries on from that theme that at the start of this season, and it has been the case in League One for a while now, you get these fallen giants. I think they get labelled as Sunderland, Sheffield Wednesday, Ipswich, Portsmouth, clubs like that. A lot gets made of them. When are they going to return to the Championship? And obviously they want to get back into top flight as well. Oxford potentially don't get that said about them. I mean, it gets forgotten. They were a first division side sort of in the 80s, weren't they? But they perhaps don't have the reputation of some of the clubs in League One at the moment. But in many ways that might work in their favour, because whereas quite often, even you can't win games on reputation alone, but that does kind of get expected of the likes of Sheffield Wednesday and Portsmouth and Sunderland. But whereas Oxford United, even though they've proven themselves time and again in League One to be contenders, they don't seem to get that said about them. But do you think that helps them in some ways?
I do, in comparison to the approaches of other clubs, because the lower expectations has made Oxford able to put out sort of a more long-term view in terms of their recruitment and the amount of time they gave Carl Robinson and continue to do. When he first came in, they struggled a bit, but they've been able to reap the rewards with their faith in him. Whereas with these big clubs like Sunderland, Sheffield Wednesday, we've seen definitely with Ipswich this season, there is kind of a win now mentality, which can definitely go one of two ways in the transfer market, and it makes the downside usually a lot more when you're buying maybe older players that you want to guarantee promotion, compared to slow and steady, which we've seen many clubs adopt and buying players with more sort of sell on value, which is how Oxford have been able to compete for such a long time. They're able to pick up lots of bargains. I remember a couple of years ago in January, they sold Tariq Fosu and Shandon Baptiste to Brentford, which did harm their promotion push that season, but the money that it brought in enabled them to reinvest in the squad and bring in some excellent players that we have seen in recent years, and just keep them stable at a playoff level in League One, which is a huge achievement for them, considering what they're up against, as you rightly mentioned.
Let's look on the flip side now, Marcus. As with every team, there's strengths and weaknesses. I mean, one weakness that you could perhaps maybe level at Oxford is obviously they've got this experience of going so far, getting to the playoffs. But they've obviously never just got over the line in recent years. Those battle scars, if you like, can they work against them or work for them? I guess it kind of depends on the mentality at the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I'd probably edge to say it puts them in a better position than some of the other clubs. I think Robinson will have learnt from the experience. He came so close in that final, losing 2-1 to Wickham in a game where it was probably a set piece and two set pieces were Wickham goals in that game. It was a really frustrating one. They were unlucky maybe not to achieve promotion in that playoff final. But compared to the other clubs, I think Robinson's experience might stand him in good stead. He can go into them with lower expectations and be a little bit more calm and composed on the touchline than maybe he has been. And the pressure on the other clubs around them, there could be some huge sides in the playoffs this season, with the likes of Portsmouth putting together the run that they have in recent months. They're more desperate to achieve promotion, and there's more expectations on them from the club's hierarchy. The manager's under more pressure to deliver in that situation. And on the pitch, of course, as we've mentioned, the players that have been able to keep hold of for a number of years should be able to hopefully put in better performances, having been in that pressure cooker before. So sometimes you do see these wounds open up again if you go behind in the first leg or something like that. But I think Carl Robinson as a manager has definitely matured a lot since becoming the manager of Oxford, and having that identity and knowing the way they're going to play, regardless of the scenario and the game situation. And just knowing their individual jobs in what can be some very chaotic moments in playoff football definitely should put them in a better position than if they had no experience of it at all.
We'll get on to Robinson a little bit more in a minute, but just before we do, Marcus, just keeping on the weaknesses, do you think there's any other areas that Oxford's, obviously January window's open at the moment, are there any areas, particularly perhaps on the pitch, that you think they might need to address?
Well, they are better going forward than they are defensively. That's been the case for quite a while. And I'd probably say that it is more a symptom of Robinson's philosophy and the brand of football that he wants to play compared to the actual personnel within the squad. As I mentioned with Sedan and the attacking fullbacks that Robinson likes to deploy, sometimes they are a little bit vulnerable in transition just because of the numbers they can commit going forward. They could possibly add one or two defenders. They lost Josh Ruffles and Rob Atkinson to Championship clubs in the summer, brought in Jordan Thornley on loan, and of course Sedan from Birmingham to plug those holes. Possibly you could argue that they could bring in another more experienced centre back, a bit more of a firefighter, someone that's got promotion experience on their CV could maybe help them. I could look in goal as well. I think Jake Eastwood and Jack Stevens aren't really in that elite group of goalkeepers at League One level, and we've seen that Robinson has been sort of hesitant to give one of them an extended run in the team. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there, and that could even go on to affect the back four. So I do look defensively. I think going forward, they're up there with the best teams in League One and have been for a number of years now. So if you are look to an area of the pitch, it would be that back line. But I do think the way Robinson sets them up sometimes makes that look a little bit more difficult and concerning than it really is compared to how it contributes to the way that they play.
Let's talk manager Carl Robinson now, Marcus. Obviously, you've seen plenty of his managerial style firsthand when he was at Charlton, a few years ago now. Did some good work at MK Dons as well. Obviously brought to Oxford with the view of them eventually sort of getting into the Championship. Do you think he gets all the credit he perhaps deserves? I mean, he's a very proven manager, particularly at sort of League One level, and this sort of level of the game doesn't seem to get too many chances higher up. But in terms of managers at third tier level, he seems to get results more often than not, doesn't he?
Yeah, I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. I do think he is underappreciated. He's a figure that definitely splits opinion. Sometimes he's a little bit prickly in post match interviews. He does like to give long, in depth answers, which, as someone that's interested in the tactical side of the game, I think he does provide a better insight than a lot of other managers that like to keep it. There are more of a closed book when talking to the media, but I think sometimes that does sort of rub people up the wrong way after a defeat or something like that. Sometimes he doesn't help himself in that scenario. But I think with the quality of clubs, the likes of Liverpool, West Ham, that have been loaning players consistently to Oxford United in recent years, there definitely is a trust there with Carl Robinson, and it speaks to the reputation that he's been able to build, that these clubs are trusting him to develop their younger players. And looking at the sides and the budgets that he's been competing against over the last few years, he's done a great job. Oxford were not competing towards the top end of League One before he came in. They're more acclimatising to the level, having only been promoted, I think, a couple of seasons before he came in there. So to take them to the level that he has and to consistently produce that deserves a lot of respect. He's quite a young manager as well still. So it is a surprise maybe that we see these jobs in the Championship come up, and we've seen the likes of Ryan Lowe, Russell Martin, managers like that get linked with them in the past. It is maybe a small surprise to see Robinson not towards the lower end of those shortlists, but it does look like he's very settled and is buying into the project in place at Oxford United. So yeah, I think that they're looking at that overall goal to get into the Championship, of course, and Robinson, so far so good in looking to achieve that.
Certainly is this season. Let's just look at the league standings then, Marcus, before we wrap up and get to our conclusion. In terms of the teams you think maybe could prevent Oxford at least from finishing inside the top two, because that's the main topic of this debate. I mean, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I think I'm probably going to know what you're going to say. You look at Rotherham and Sunderland, obviously top two at the moment, looking stronger, and Wigan, who've got several games in hand. They only need to win a couple of them, and they're going to open up a gap to Oxford as well. The Yellows are only 6 points from the top two at the moment, so it's obviously not a insurmountable gap. But those sides in particular, those three, are looking pretty strong, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. Wigan still top of the league on PPG. It'd be interesting to see whether those games in hand does plague them, or whether they can make the most of him. Sometimes fixture congestion and having games in hand can turn out to be a disadvantage. Those three sides do look a class above the rest at the moment, I'd have to say. I think the run that Rotherham have been on has been incredible, and if they can continue that, they'll really run away with it. It's been really impressive how Sunderland have recovered from that little blip they had towards the end of sort of October and into November. They're looking really good at the moment, so they're well worth their place within that trio. I think below Oxford, I'd say Plymouth have dropped off a bit. I wouldn't count them as seriously as maybe we have done in recent months. Wycombe Wanderers are always going to be in and around it. They're very tough, and I think, yeah, with the experience that they've got from even winning the playoffs, you could argue that might come into play as well. Also MK Dons and Portsmouth with the run that they've been on, there's still a little bit of ground to make up for Pompey, but if they can have a good January transfer window, keep the likes of Curtis and Harness, then they'd probably fancy their chances of finishing inside the playoffs. Whether that means they'll leapfrog Oxford and push into the automatic promotion race, I think remains to be seen. But those three sides, I don't think we can count out just yet. As for the others below them, I think there's a little bit too much ground for the likes of Ipswich to make up to really overtake Oxford, given the consistent level of performance they've been able to sustain this season.
Okay, let's get to our conclusion then. So today's topic, or this particular topic of this debate, was can Oxford United get into the top two by the end of this season? Marcus, what do you think? Top two, top six, or drop out the playoffs altogether?
I think it'd be comfortable top six. There might be points in the second half of the season where they can get themselves in touching distance with the top two. And we have seen Oxford have a sort of streaky nature to their fixtures and their runs in recent years. I think they could put a positive run together, maybe jump into third place if Wigan struggle to deal with the fixture congestions in the coming months. But I just don't think they'll have enough to break into the top two come the end of the season. But I think they'll have plenty of time, unlike last season, to prepare for the playoffs, sort of plan for it, and maybe seal a fourth or fifth place and have a nice gap between them and the chasing pack for the top six. They're in a better position than they have been in recent years, and if they can sort of reflect and reproduce the second half of the campaigns that they've had in recent years, and they'll put themselves in a really strong position to have a good crack at the playoffs this season.
Okay, we shall see what happens. Oxford fan Ian has also got in touch, just to wrap up, got in touch on Facebook. If we continue our home form, we are genuine contenders. Come on, you yellows. Right then, that wraps up the debate for, this particular debate anyway, for this afternoon. Coming up on Football League World TV, one more show today, the EFL Transfer Zone. Sam Rourke will be hosting that one. He's joined by Ben Wignall and Chris Gallagher. Marcus, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Been great to get your thoughts on Oxford United. People at home, wherever you've been watching as well, do like this video on YouTube and do subscribe to our channel, Football League World TV. That'd be greatly appreciated by all of us here at Football League World. But from myself and Marcus, it is bye for now.